Back in high school, I had a teacher named Mr. Birchfield. Taught U.S. history, among other things. He was kind of an old school teacher. He loved to tell interesting and entertaining stories about things that happened in the past. And that's all well and good, as long as those stories are true, right? Because this is history class, not like storytelling hour. And some of his stories were kind of questionable, let's say. For example, a story that you probably have heard about George Washington as a young man chopping down his father's cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie. It's a good story, but most historians doubt if it actually happened, right? I remember Mr. Birchfield telling us a story about the origin of the word okay, that term. You ever wonder where that comes from? Well, he said that when Andrew Jackson, later president, was a little boy, he was in school and he took a test and he wrote the initials OK at the top of his paper to stand for all correct, meaning that all the answers were correct and the teacher didn't need to bother grading it. And of course, that's not how you spell all correct. And so it's kind of a funny story. Now, that is an actual story that was told back then. But it was made up by Andrew Jackson's political opponents to make him seem stupid, right? It is not a story that probably actually took place. When Mr. Birchfield would tell stories like this in class and portray them as fact, I remember my buddy Luke. He would sometimes raise his hand and be like, Mr. Birchfield, is this true? And even though Mr. Birchfield would insist that it was, the rest of the class were like, I don't know. This was before everybody had smartphones. You could fact check in real time. What I think it really taught us was that a healthy level of skepticism can be a good thing. Let's be honest. We live in a world where people make all kinds of claims about all kinds of things. Just look at the constant ads we're exposed to, or media coverage with its bias, and it can be tough to separate the truth from fiction. So we learn not to take things at face value. And like I said, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but one of the effects of that is that it can be hard to be really sure about anything because we don't trust our sources. And that can also be true about our faith. My faith is important to me. I know many of you would say the same. I believe the things that we talk about here, that there's a God who created the universe as well as humanity, but the perfect relationship we were created to have with God was ruined by our sin. But God launched a rescue mission for us through the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And because he did that, we can have a restored relationship with God that lasts forever. It's what God desires from each of us. I have built my life around that faith. It's a very big deal to me. But am I sure? I'm confident in what I believe. But if I'm honest, I'm not always sure. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you believe. You really do. But you might also have questions. Maybe including some of the questions we've talked about in this series that just won't go away. And maybe while we want to say that we believe in what the Bible teaches us about God 100%, and if that's true for you, awesome. But for a lot of us, if we're honest, it's more like, I believe it 95%, 92%, 80%, maybe less. And the rest is doubt and questions. Maybe for some of us it's 50-50 or less. And we might wonder what percentage of faith is good enough for God. If faith is a big deal to God, and it is, we want to be sure. Today we're going to wrap up this series that we've been in since Easter called Search Engine. And we've taken a look at some of the tough questions people have about the Christian faith, things that both Christians and non-Christians wonder about. And today it's all about this question. What if I wrestle with doubts about my faith? Like, is that okay? And what do I do with it? Well, as usual, it might help if we define our terms, faith and doubt. The Bible itself defines faith for us. In the New Testament letter we call the book of Hebrews, it says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith involves things that are unseen, unproven. And for that reason, we're never going to have 100% certainty. There does come a point when you choose to believe in something. Everybody does that, not just Christians. To a degree, we all decide what to believe, but not blindly. Real faith is not blind faith. It's using your brain to interpret the evidence available to you and drawing a conclusion, determining where that evidence seems to be leading. But not every question can be answered fully because we're human. We're not God. And so you're never going to have 100%. You might have like 90. That's pretty good, 90. And faith is saying that because I 90% believe this is true, I trust that the other 10% will work out, even if I can't fully explain it right now. My faith is the assurance of what I don't see. But doubt objects to faith. It says, I can't see it. I can't prove it. So maybe I'm unconvinced it's true. The dictionary says that doubt is to consider something questionable or unlikely, or to be undecided in your opinion or belief. It means you're not sure. You're not sure. And you may even be leaning toward it being untrue. Like, does that make sense? Like if I say, I doubt that the Indianapolis Colts will make the playoffs this year. Like, I can't see the future. I'm not saying they definitely won't. I'm just skeptical, and for good reason. Like, they're my team. It's not going to happen. But, I don't know the future. There's uncertainty to it because it hasn't happened yet. Doubt emphasizes that uncertainty over the certainty. So, when we have doubts about something our faith teaches, something the Bible teaches, maybe even like whether or not God exists at all, we're saying that the uncertainty of it is drowning out the certainty. We're saying we're not sure. We lack confidence. And maybe we even kind of find ourselves waffling back and forth between two opinions. And you should know, whether you are a Christian hearing this or not, if you've experienced doubts, you are not alone. I'd say most, if not all, Christians deal with doubt of some kind from time to time. It is very normal. Many of us have even gone through like whole seasons of doubt when our faith is really stretched, really tested. And this can happen for any number of reasons, but it usually comes down to this, like something happens that forces us to confront what we actually believe. Not what our parents believed, not what we were taught in school, not what we think we're supposed to believe, what we actually believe. I have definitely wrestled with doubt at different periods in my life. Now, I have never walked away from my faith completely, but man, I have wondered about a lot of things. Probably some of the same things that you have. Like, what if this is all just made up? And it's kept me up at night. So doubt is a very common thing to experience as a follower of Jesus. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. because seasons of doubt can actually lead us to a stronger, more mature faith. What matters is what we do with it. I believe that when we navigate our doubts in a way that honors God, the result is a deeper faith. Now, I haven't done that every time I've doubted. But when I have, as difficult as those seasons have been, they have led to good things and a stronger faith on the other side. One way that some Christians deal with their doubts is by a process that has relatively recently become known as deconstruction. Maybe you've heard that. They take apart their faith, piece by piece, and examine it to determine if they really believe it. Again, like doubt, deconstruction is not necessarily a bad thing, because we do need to make sure that what we believe matches what Jesus taught, what the Bible teaches. But sadly, I know a lot of Christians, and I mean a lot of people who used to be Christians, but they went through a season of doubt, of deconstruction, and they ended up deconstructing themselves right out of the faith. They didn't just take it apart. They demolished it. They had different motivations for doing that. Maybe it was hypocrisy in the church that did it for them. Maybe they hadn't ever really been exposed to non-Christian viewpoints, and when they did, it kind of blew their mind. Maybe they struggled to navigate the tension that exists between what our culture, what the world believes and teaches, and what the Bible teaches. But for whatever reason, many end up turning their back on the way of Jesus. They said, I'm out. I don't believe. I know a lot of people like that. You probably do too. Maybe you've even been through a season like that yourself. I first became familiar with that term deconstruction, not talking about Christianity, but by watching cooking competition shows. You know, like Food Network, like my family, we do this sometimes. It's kind of fun, right? You know, like Chopped and Cutthroat Kitchen and Guy's Grocery Games. You know, it's fun. It's entertaining. And we can watch them as a family. On one of those shows, if a chef, you know, they have a time limit. If a chef makes a dish that they say is deconstructed when they introduce it to the judges, what that means is they've taken some kind of classic dish and they've broken it down, separated it out to its different components, and then presented that as a dish. And after watching enough of those cooking competition shows, you start to realize judges don't generally like that. Like, deconstructed dishes usually don't do very well on those shows because it seems very disjointed. They always say, it seems like you ran out of time here. They didn't have time to finish the dish. And that's what a lot of people do when they deconstruct their faith. They don't finish the process. They have good questions, but they don't really seek answers, at least not from Jesus. And they end up just kind of shrugging their shoulders. So instead of deconstructing and then reconstructing a stronger, firmer, more biblical faith, they're left with a big mess. So what should we do when we're in a season of doubting or deconstruction? Well, let's look at the Bible. I always think that's a good idea. Many people in the Bible went through periods of doubting, even people who personally witnessed some incredible, miraculous things firsthand. In fact, one of them has a whole reputation, even a nickname, based on his doubt. It's probably not a fair nickname. Not all nicknames are fair. Not all reputations are fair, but it persists nonetheless. Doubting Thomas. Thomas, he was in Jesus' inner circle. He was one of his 12 core disciples who traveled around with him, and he became an apostle, one of the hand-picked leaders of the early church. And the Bible doesn't tell us a ton about Thomas. We kind of get clues. We know he was a guy who wasn't afraid to ask Jesus tough questions. He did that a couple of times. He was also the guy who, when Jesus said, when his buddy Lazarus died, I'm going to go back to Judea, even though the last time Jesus was in Judea, they tried to kill him. Thomas is the guy who spoke up and said to the other disciples, let's go with him, even if it means we'll die too. So Thomas was capable of some pretty significant faith. But apparently the crucifixion of Jesus really shook that faith. I mean, this was a major crisis of faith, not just for Thomas, but for all of the disciples. The guy they trusted, the guy they believed in as the Messiah, the guy they've been following around for 3 years, watching him do some incredible things, was dead. And yes, Jesus had said this was going to happen, and he had said that he was going to rise from the dead. But the disciples, they didn't get it. They didn't understand. Like, Jesus often used stories and analogies, and they're like, well, maybe it's one of those. And so not just Thomas, but the whole group of disciples, they're disappointed, they're disillusioned, they're scared, they think they might be next. But then, Jesus rises from the dead. It's incredible. And he appears to many people, including many of the disciples, some more than once. But the time that Jesus appeared to like all of the disciples when they were together, Thomas wasn't there when that happened. Where was he? I don't know. Like maybe he got stuck in traffic. Maybe he was, he wasn't included in the text thread. Maybe he was working his side job for DoorDash, whatever. But anyway, he wasn't there. And so what does he do? How does he respond? Well, let's read. The Gospel according to John, one of the biographies of Jesus in the New Testament, chapter 20, beginning with verse 24. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, which both of those words, Thomas and Didymus, mean twin. So a lot of people think Thomas was a twin, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. It apparently did not matter to Thomas that all his friends were insisting that it was true, that Jesus was alive. He just could not believe it. He couldn't wrap his brain around it. Like maybe he thought they saw a vision or a ghost or something, which is why he insisted on touching the wounds on Jesus' body. Maybe he thought it was like some kind of prank, and if so, it was in the worst taste. He's like, this is not funny, guys. Like, I don't know what you think you saw, but there's no way it could have been Jesus. And because you all think it is, I'm kind of worried about you. And this went on for a week. So it's easy to imagine that by the end of that week, Thomas and the other disciples were getting pretty frustrated with each other. Verse 26. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Like we talked about back on Easter, after his resurrection, Jesus was apparently not subject to the same rules of time and space he was before the resurrection. I mean, he was God. He can do stuff like this. He did things like suddenly appear and disappear, even in a locked room. Like, how did he do it? Did he walk through the wall? Did he teleport in there? I don't know. But however he did it, it's kind of an impressive flex. And it kind of probably freaked them out, which is why the first thing Jesus has to say is, peace be with you. Don't freak out, guys. Peace be with you. Going on, then he said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. And then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. That's us, friends. Notice, Jesus doesn't scold Thomas for doubting. He doesn't condemn him or make fun of him. No, he doesn't commend him either. He says, stop doubting and believe. It's not like it's a praiseworthy thing to doubt. Good job, Thomas. Way to stand firm. But it's not necessarily wrong either. It's normal. But I notice also that Jesus, he offers Thomas the chance to touch his wounds. He does what Thomas said he needed in order to believe. He provides him with what he said he needed. Now, it doesn't say, interestingly, whether or not Thomas does it. We don't know. But instead, Thomas responds with a very personal declaration of faith. My Lord and my God. Not just Lord, not just God, my Lord and my God. Because that's that's who Jesus is, and that's who he truly became to Thomas in that moment. Like he did with Thomas, God can help us navigate our doubts. God uses our doubt as an invitation to know him better. So not only is doubt a normal, natural part of a faith journey, doubt can actually be a good thing. And with that in mind, here's the question. How? How can we navigate our doubts in a way that honors God? How do we not just deconstruct our faith into an inedible mess and leave it there? I'm going to suggest 3 things that we can do. First, be honest. Be honest with our doubts and our questions. We all have them about a lot of things, and some of our doubts and questions are bound to have to do with matters of faith and spirituality, even if we don't really consider ourselves followers of Jesus. But if Thomas can personally walk with Jesus for years and witness the things that he did and still experience doubt, don't you think we will too? We didn't see the way he did. So be honest about your doubts and your questions. Identify them. Be honest with yourself, with others, and with God. You might as well. He already knows. He can handle it. So have the courage to be honest. What is it you really want? Thomas wanted to physically see Jesus. That's what he needed, or he thought. To see Jesus. To even have the chance to touch him. He knew what he was looking for. So what about your questions? What about your doubts? Are they more like intellectual and philosophical in nature? That's fair. Many of them are like deep, big picture stuff. Some of my questions are like that. Things that I don't understand. We've talked about things in this series that are in that category. Like, how can Christians say Jesus is the only way to God? How can a loving God send people to hell? How are science and Christianity supposed to interact? And what do we do about hypocritical Christians? Doesn't that just mean the whole thing? Doesn't that just disprove the whole thing? No. And what if you're a Christian who struggles with a way like depression or anxiety? Now, if you happen to miss any of those messages, shameless plug, they're all on YouTube. Our channel is Ren Church FL. You can go back and listen. In June, after next week, we're going to actually take a few weeks to unpack a big question that a lot of Christians and non-Christians have, which is, why would a good God allow evil and suffering in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? Now, if you struggle with those questions or many others, there are so many great resources, books, websites, etc., that address them. Okay? But maybe, if you're honest, it's not so much that these are intellectual or philosophical questions for you. Maybe some of your doubts and questions come from your own difficult life circumstances. Like, for example, how can you possibly worship a God that has allowed you to experience some of the things that you have? A failed marriage, abuse, loneliness, some kind of injury or sickness, a major loss, even severe hurt at the hands of Christians, at the hands of the church. I've been there too. And those are legit questions. So have the courage to be honest about them. Being able to clearly identify where your doubts are coming from can really help you process through your doubts and help ensure you're asking the right questions. That said, I want to also point out that there is a difference between honest questions and a smokescreen. Here's what I mean. Like, sometimes people say they have doubts and questions, and they may, but that's not the real problem. They're using their doubts as a smokescreen to hide the real issue. So it's not that the questions don't have answers, it's that we don't like the answers. Because the answers might mean that we have to change what we believe or how we live. And we don't always want to do that. Like, it's one thing to say, I don't know, how do we know that we can really trust the Bible? That's a fair question, and there are answers to that. But if you're really only saying that because you don't like some of what the Bible says, that's not honest. That's not the real question. You should absolutely be willing to ask the hard questions, but then you should be willing to seek the answers, to study and learn. Don't just play the doubt card, shrug your shoulders, and live however you want. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of people who go through that period of deconstruction end up. They don't finish the process because it's actually motivated by the fact that they don't like some of what the Bible says about marriage, sexuality, money, whatever. As we talked about like a month ago, truth is true. It is constant, whether we believe in it or not, whether we like it or not. And we need to pursue it even when it might lead to difficult choices or lifestyle changes. So let's be honest with our doubts and our questions. Next, be humble. We don't know everything. I don't, and neither do you. No, you don't. I know you're 15, but even you don't know everything. Like God reminded a guy named Job in the Bible, when Job started asking some tough questions about some difficult circumstances he had gone through. We didn't create the universe. We weren't there when God did. God does not promise complete explanations to all of our questions. We wouldn't be able to understand them anyway, to fathom them truly. He doesn't owe us that. And yet, God invites our questions. Jesus invited Thomas to touch his wounds, what Thomas said he would need to do to believe that Jesus was really alive. Jesus knew Thomas's heart and met him there. And I love that. It's a demonstration of Jesus' compassion and his grace. It's all right, Thomas. Here. Go ahead. Guess what? We serve that same Jesus. So, with an attitude of humility, once you've honestly identified your questions, ask them. And I would suggest you ask God through prayer, pray about it. Ask God's word, read what the Bible says about it, and ask God's people. I am not suggesting with some of these questions that you don't also consider viewpoints outside of Christians, okay? But you also, if you do that, you also have to hear the opposite side. You have to hear the Christian viewpoint. I guarantee, no matter what question you have, what doubt you've been wrestling with, you are not the first one to think of it. I mean, there's probably other people who've been wrestling with this for hundreds of years, at least. Like, you know what? I just roll my eyes whenever I see somebody on social media, Instagram or whatever, acting like they're the first ones to come up with what they think are like a slam dunk argument against God and the Bible. I mean, this isn't new. Nothing's new. And there are answers out there. And we can find them through prayer, through God's word, through his people, and through many other resources. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes a little work. And sometimes the answer isn't what we might want it to be. That happens. But we need to be humble and remember that God is God. We are not. And even if we don't get the answers that we want, if we're honest, if we're humble, God will still meet us in our doubt. And when he does, we need to be ready. Be ready to discover a lot more of God, to know him more. Thomas's encounter with doubt led to a more personal relationship with Jesus. His response, remember, my Lord and my God. History may have given Thomas that unfortunate nickname, Doubting Thomas. But while he did experience doubt at a very public moment, kind of like Bill Buckner's error in the 1986 World Series, just very public, everybody's looking at you. Thomas was actually a man of incredible faith. The Bible doesn't tell us much about what happened to Thomas after this. What we know about him, we learn from other historical sources. And from that, we learn that Thomas traveled all over the place, sharing the good news about Jesus, his personal Lord and God. And he eventually, apparently, made it all the way to India, spreading that message to a people group who had never heard it before. And historical accounts tell us that Thomas was eventually killed for sharing his faith in Jesus. Apparently, God worked in Thomas's season of doubt to grow and deepen his faith, to prepare him for what was next. The book of Hebrews that I mentioned earlier, a little bit later in that chapter, it says, God rewards those who earnestly seek him. When we earnestly, wholeheartedly seek him, God will reveal himself to us. You know, faith is like a muscle. It can be built. It can grow. But to do that, you have to have resistance. It has to be worked out. Like if you're going to have big, strong muscles, you need to lift weights. You also need to eat well. You need to work out. I've heard, this is the rumor. I don't have much personal experience. But you have to encounter resistance to build your muscles. Our seasons of doubt, our questions, whether they're based in philosophical or intellectual curiosity, or if they're inspired by our own life experiences, that's like lifting weights to strengthen our faith. I'm not saying you'll never doubt again. I'm not saying you'll never have another question. But because of your deeper, stronger faith in God, you'll find that things are a little lighter now. And he can use you and work through you in ways you've never experienced before. You can have a bigger impact in this world for him because your faith has been tested and strengthened. And now it can handle whatever comes your way next. So in your seasons of doubt, I encourage you, earnestly seek God. We all have doubts, but you can navigate them in a way that honors God. And when you do that, the result is a deeper faith. So ask your questions. Be honest. Be humble. And be ready.